Chapter 227. Li Qingshan also heard it, but he didn't care and continued, 700 spirit stones. 800 spirit stones. Holy Hall. Li Qingshan directly said, 1,000 spirit stones. The scene fell into a momentary silence. Even for a superior-grade spirit artifact, it was extremely rare for it to be worth more than 1,000 spirit stones. Could it be that the sword Qi calligraphy really had such an extraordinary ability? Everyone had the same thought, but at this moment, no one dared to make a bid. If they made a bid and really spent more than 1,000 spirit stones to buy this medial-grade spirit artifact of unknown uses, then they really wouldn't be able to cry even if they wanted to. Is there anyone else who wants to continue bidding? If there isn't, this sword Qi calligraphy belongs to this fellow Daoist. Shi Peipei's eyes turned, and her wrinkled face was full of smiles. There was no more sound from within the thick fog. It was unknown whether it was because she felt it wasn't worth it, or because she had other plans in mind. Shi Peipei said to Li Qingshan, "Fellow Daoist, the sword Qi calligraphy is yours." A moment later, the sword Qi calligraphy was delivered to Li Qingshan. Li Qingshan couldn't wait to open it. The strokes on the scroll were twisted, and the sword Qi was fierce. It was just that it was half the size of the cursive sword calligraphy, which was why it could be considered a medial-grade spirit artifact. It seemed that when this calligraphy was separated, it wasn't equal. The problem now was, how was he going to fuse them together? Li Qingshan tried to take out the cursive sword calligraphy and stack it with the sword Qi calligraphy. He shook it, but they didn't seem to have any intention of fusing, which made him slightly disappointed. But he immediately pulled himself together. His current cultivation was too low, and it was very difficult for him to control a superior-grade spirit artifact. He couldn't refine a supreme-grade spirit artifact at all. Otherwise, the cursive sword calligraphy wouldn't be as simple as just releasing sword Qi. Only when his cultivation increased and he refined both spirit artifacts at the same time would he be able to try again. Little and watched eagerly. Li Qingshan casually passed the sword Qi book to Little and Li Qingshan glanced at the room shrouded in mist and muttered to himself, "Why does this person want to buy this sword Qi book?" Little and immediately began to study the sword Qi book. He lay on the floor covered with a thick silk carpet, his left hand supporting his chin, and the fingers of his right hand forming a sword. Within an extremely small area, he moved quickly, leaving behind a series of stagnant afterimages. It looked like he was performing a sword dance, but it also looked like he was writing, but it was extremely rhythmic and beautiful. Her comprehension of the cursive sword calligraphy's sword intent had increased by another level. When he heard Li Qingshan's words, Little and tilted his head and said, "Perhaps he's the same as me." He suddenly stabbed out with his finger sword dozens of times, tearing through the air and stirring up a fierce wind. The wind immediately howled in the room, causing Li Qingshan's clothes to flap in the wind. Li Qingshan suddenly understood. Yes, this was the most likely reason. If they didn't obtain a part of it, no Qi practitioner would be willing to risk a few hundred spirit stones. At this time, there were a few soft knocks on the door. Li Qingshan opened the door, and Lu Ruping said, "Just now, the fellow Daoist who was bidding against you wants to see you." Li Qingshan said, "All right, I also want to see him." He became more and more certain of his speculation. If he put together a piece of the sword Qi book, then the cursive sword calligraphy would definitely be a supreme-grade spirit artifact. If he could obtain another fragment, then what would it be? A legendary spirit artifact? Lu Ruping backed out obediently. She actually had no intentions of pestering him anymore. After leaving the room, she smiled disdainfully, but she was in no hurry to pass on the message. Instead, she turned in the direction of another room and knocked on the door. A young man opened the door. To no surprise, it was Mu Zhizong. When he saw her enter, he directly asked, "What took you so long?" Lu Ruping said coquettishly, "The customer who was bidding earlier wants to see this guy surnamed Niu, so he's a little late. Senior brother Mu, please don't take offense." Mu Zhizong did not take this matter to heart. He turned around and said, "Senior brother Song, I never thought this bastard would actually be so rich. If he sells that demon core, he'll have 2,000 or 3,000 spiritual stones on him at the very least. Senior brother, You can say that this is a blessing in disguise. The Sacred Hall. The person who sat there was actually the senior brother Song of the Pheasant's Grace Mountain, Song Ming, who had been tossed out of the wall by Li Qingshan in a single move. Lu Ruping helped him out. That's not all. He just spent 800 spiritual stones to buy a high-grade spiritual artifact, and he used a talisman to exchange for a few hundred spiritual stones. Originally, in the School of Miscellany, the transactions of customers were all kept a secret, or they would be severely punished. However, she had failed to curry favor with Li Qingshan, so she became resentful. Mu Zhizong just happened to come at this time to ask about Li Qingshan, so he told her to report to him immediately as soon as she saw Li Qingshan. He promised her some benefits. When Lu Ruping saw Li Qingshan step into the store of miscellaneous goods, she immediately turned around and told this to Mu Zhizong, who was in another compartment. As for Mu Zhizong, he had other plans. Song Ming sat there without moving. He glanced at Mu Zhizong and said, "You purposefully told me this information. Just what are you planning?" Mu Zhizong walked over and patted Song Ming's shoulder. The disciples of the Three Mountains are like birds of a feather. Senior brother, how can I just stand by and watch you be humiliated? I just happened to come across this thief a while ago, so I wanted to kill him and get him out of here. Unfortunately, I don't think you're this bastard's opponent, so it's even more impossible for me to defeat him with my cultivation. Now that the people of your esteemed sect are nearby, there's really no better opportunity for revenge. Although he was smiling, killing intent flickered inside. Niu Juxia, oh Niu Juxia. Originally, we wouldn't have had to go this far, but since you're still bold enough to take Zijian away, don't blame me for being merciless. You're just a mere independent cultivator, yet you're so arrogant. Even if you don't die to my hands, you'll die somewhere else. I'll just treat it as sending you off in advance. Song Ming clenched his fists as his face paled. After the battle, he had become renowned in the Three Mountains. He was often mocked by others, which was basically the greatest humiliation he had ever experienced in his life. He could not swallow this no matter what. Now that he thought about how his enemy was nearby, his eyes reddened even more. And the 3,000 spiritual stones were enough to interest any Qi practitioner. No matter what Mu Zhizong's scheme was, he had to try it. In the end, he asked carefully, "Doesn't your Green Vine Mountain want a piece of the pie for something so good?" Mu Zhizong said, "Our Green Vine Mountain is the host. If we work together to kill an independent cultivator before the herb gathering ceremony, it'll probably make everyone panic and affect the progress of the ceremony. I wouldn't dare to do that even if I were bolder. However, if it's a personal grievance, then there's nothing to say. Not to mention, will senior brother Song not give me a piece of the pie?" Song Ming's expression changed. Suddenly, he snorted coldly and left the room. "Help me keep an eye on him." Mu Zhizong said, "Ruping, keep watching him. Once it's done, you'll get plenty of benefits." Lu Ruping stuck close to him and fawned over him. She said softly, "I knew that brute wouldn't be able to escape from your schemes." Mu Zhizong became impatient. He pushed her aside and made his way out. Lu Ruping stamped her foot viciously. None of these men were good. Li Qingshan had no idea about the schemes and schemes outside. The auction had broadened his horizons. He gained a rough estimate of the value of spiritual artifacts and spiritual herbs. However, his item had yet to be auctioned. He wanted to see just how much the demon core was worth. A while later, an earthen yellow demon core was placed on the stage. A 7th grade earth element demon core. It can be used to make earth element pills. The starting price is 1,000 spiritual stones. Shi Peipei gave a series of introductions to the functions of the demon core. In the end, she announced the starting price just now. Just the starting price was even higher than regular high-grade spiritual artifacts. Not only was it rarer, but it could be used in a wider range as well. Shi Peipei looked at the few viewing boxes with the best seats at the very top. It had been extremely quiet the entire time, as if there was nothing there that could interest the people inside. Li Qingshan pursed his lips. He considered whether he should make a few bids and add fuel to the fire. However, he discovered very soon that there was no need for that. Finally, The first bid was heard from the few viewing boxes at the very top. 1,200 spiritual stones. 1,500. 1,600. The price of the demon core rose rapidly. The smile on Li Qingshan's face grew wider. He hugged little Anne and rubbed her radiant face. "Ah, we're rich." The noisy and lively venue quietened down once again. The auction had ended, and the lights on the stage dimmed. However, Li Qingshan could still clearly see the remaining aura in the air. The enthusiastic atmosphere seemed to have not dissipated. Li Qingshan was still sitting in the viewing box. He didn't leave. He was reminiscing about the bidding war just now. Of course, it didn't have much to do with the demon core. It was a supreme-grade spirit artifact in the shape of a small bottle. The base price was 3,500 spirit stones, and the base price of each bid was 500 spirit stones. Every time the price was raised, the chi practitioners below the stage would blush and their hearts would race. However, the Foundation establishment cultivators were calm and collected, bidding in a relaxed and composed manner. From the beginning to the end, whether they won or lost, there was not a trace of anger in them. There was absolutely no chi practitioner who dared to participate in such a dull bidding war. In the end, the supreme-grade spirit artifact was sold to the guest in the western room at the price of 9,500 spiritual stones. The one who won in the end even calmly said, "You let me win." Li Qingshan admitted that he didn't have this kind of demeanor. It had nothing to do with breadth of mind and bearing. It was purely due to the difference in strength. He increasingly felt that whether it was a human or a demon, only after they had passed the first heavenly tribulation could they be considered to have truly stepped onto the path of cultivation. It was like a child learning how to walk and talk. They could stagger towards their goals and express themselves. Previously, chi practitioners and demon beasts were just learning how to crawl on the ground. Of course, the demon core finally met Li Qingshan's expectations. Just as Shi Peipei had expected, the Earth Attribute Demon Core was sold for more than 2,000 spiritual stones. In the end, it was sold for 2,600 spiritual stones. Chapter 228. Adding on the spirit stones he had prepared from selling the spirit talismans, Li Qingshan's spirit stones had once again reached 2,000. He was even richer than before he had bought the whale's ingestion of water. Sacred Hall. The reason why he was still sitting here was because he was waiting for the chi practitioner who wanted to buy the sword chi calligraphy. If he really did have another copy of the cursive sword calligraphy, then he would use these spirit stones to buy it from him. Footsteps came from outside the door. Li Qingshan opened the door and found Lu Rupiang standing there. "Congratulations, fellow Daoist. Not only did you sell the Yao core for a high price, you also obtained what you wanted." Li Qingshan glanced at the empty space behind her. "Where's that person?" Lu Rupiang said. That fellow Daoist suddenly changed his mind. "I'm sorry for making you wait. If there's nothing else you want to buy, please leave." Li Qingshan was a bit surprised. Could it be that that person didn't want the sword chi calligraphy anymore? Or was his speculation wrong? That person had been sent by the School of Miscellany to raise the price. Lu Rupiang's change in attitude made him even more suspicious. He said, "See you again," and brushed past Lu Rupiang. Lu Rupiang's back was facing him. Her lips opened and closed, but no sound came out. She said, "See you again." She combed her hair and said in her heart, "But I still have to thank you." All she had done was sell Li Qingshan's appearance to the chi practitioner, and she had received 20 spiritual stones. It was rare to come across such a lucrative deal. Ever since she met this Nyo guy, she could be said to have been rolling in money. Whether it was from the School of Miscellany's rewards from his business or selling information about him to others, she had made a lot of money. However, she didn't notice that Li Qingshan had inadvertently turned around and looked at her back. His eyes flashed with a cold light. There were many people who could be vicious and merciless, but there were very few who possessed both intelligence and foresight. Qianrongji was one, but there weren't many Qianrongji. At the very least, she hadn't truly seen through Li Qingshan's personality. A favor of a meal must be repaid, and a grudge must be avenged. The sun shone weakly on the street, far from being able to offset the chill brought by the fierce cold wind. As long as one was a qi practitioner, they would be able to ignore this degree of temperature change, let alone Li Qingshan's demon body. However, he felt a deep chill. It wasn't because of the temperature, but because he sensed danger. This was a keen instinct that he had gained after transforming into a fiendish demon. As his cultivation increased, it became even sharper. This sharpness was no longer a so-called sixth sense. Instead, it directly benefited from the spirit turtle's method of qi suppression. Shamans were adept at using tortoise shells for divination and foreseeing the astronomical phenomena and the future. The tortoise carried the 9 palaces and 8 trigrams on its back and possessed extraordinary spirituality. As his cultivation increased, this spirituality gradually revealed itself. Although it could not foresee the future, it could still sense evil. Li Qingshan exhaled softly. He raised his head and closed his eyes. The clamor around him disappeared without a trace. A faint feeling of being watched surfaced in his heart. Not only did the person watching over him possess extraordinary cultivation, but they were also extremely skilled at concealing their presence. Even if he did not pay close attention, he would struggle to discover them. Li Qingshan opened his eyes. He did not hide in the safe town. Instead, he made his way out of the town. Danger would not disappear with time. He could only face it bravely. He stepped out of the town, and the ground sank slightly, forming a circular pit. It was like he had stepped on a trampoline. Li Qingshan shot over 100 paces away. His large figure charged towards the pure white snowy mountains with unbelievable speed. He turned around a mountain pass and vanished. The forest rushed towards him before retreating quickly. He dodged them all nimbly. If he really could not dodge them, he would directly smash through them. However, he refused to stop at all. He did not even use the spirit turtle's method of qi suppression to hide his presence. 1,000 paces away, a masked man in black stopped hiding and pursued him. Li Qingshan glanced backwards, and his eyes narrowed slightly. An 8th-layer qi practitioner. However, that was not any danger at all. It should not have given him such a great sense of danger. Was that all? He did not stop at all. Instead, he pushed himself forward with all his might. His body leaned forward and his hands would touch the ground from time to time. He was like a vicious, black tiger running through the mountains and forests, assuming the form of the tiger demon. The sacred hall the masked man cursed inside. He was determined to obtain the sword qi calligraphy, but he never thought someone would interfere. Originally, he wanted to meet with Li Qingshan and take the sword qi calligraphy back no matter what. However, upon further thought, if he bought it, he would have to spend over 1,000 spiritual stones at the very least. That was basically cutting off his flesh. As a result, he became interested in killing and stealing. In order to avoid alerting Li Qingshan, he went as far as to spend 20 spiritual stones to buy information on Li Qingshan from Lu Ruping. However, he did not expect that kid to be so vigilant. As soon as he left the market, he ran with all his might. His speed was surprisingly fast. However, he sneered inside. If you hide in the town, I won't be bold enough to touch you, but if you run out, you'll just be digging your own grave. It won't be that easy to shake him off. He used his movement technique and true qi revolved around him, shooting towards Li Qingshan like a black arrow. In a snow-covered valley, the surrounding trees were all withered. Like a black spear, it pierced straight into the sky. Li Qingshan seemed to have exhausted all his strength. He stood knee-deep in the snow. His body naturally emitted spiritual energy. Any qi practitioner could tell that he was in the 4th layer of qi practitioner, and he was very tired. Why aren't you running anymore? After a short pause, a cold and proud voice came from behind him. Li Qingshan suddenly looked back. All he saw was a masked man in black walking through the snow, emerging from the jungle. He did not leave behind a footprint in the thick snow as he stared at him coldly. Although he had pursued him for several dozen kilometers, his true qi had basically not been depleted at all. Li Qingshan turned around and asked in shock, "Why are you chasing me?" The masked man said, "Hand over the sword qi calligraphy." Li Qingshan frowned. "I don't know what the sword qi calligraphy is." Information about his identity should be kept a secret. The first person he suspected was Lu Ruping. He did not know if it was the rules of the School of Miscellany, but he had become her exclusive guest. She was the one who took care of everything in the store. However, he did not dare to be completely sure. But what if it was really that woman? He did not care about being schemed against. He was not that broad-minded. The masked man said sternly, "You still dare to lie to me. If I say it's you, then it's you." As he spoke, a black cone-shaped stream of air formed in front of him and shot towards Li Qingshan's chest. Li Qingshan dodged in a sorry state and fell into the snow. He hurriedly shouted, "Wait, it's me. I'll give it to you." The masked man laughed, "At least you know what's good for you." Li Qingshan reluctantly took out the sword Qi calligraphy and asked, "Tell me, who told you that I bought the sword Qi calligraphy? Was it that woman who passed the message?" The masked man casually grunted and looked at the sword Qi calligraphy with excitement. He did not know if he had thought of the same thing as Li Qingshan when he obtained the sword Qi calligraphy. Li Qingshan said hatefully, "I won't let her go." The masked man thought to himself, "Why would I let you go?" He changed the topic. "Also, hand over your 100 treasures pouch." Li Qingshan shouted, "Don't even think about it." The masked man said, "Then I'll take it myself." He patted his waist and a shining small sword flew out, heading straight for Li Qingshan's head. He was a bit careless. The flying sword of an 8th-layer Qi practitioner could deal with a 4th-layer Qi practitioner as easily as cutting melons and vegetables. The reason why he said so much was just to be cautious. He wanted to test if Li Qingshan had a powerful master to back him up, so he did not offend someone he could not afford to offend. After testing and confirming that Li Qingshan was indeed a normal loose cultivator, he did not hesitate to kill him. A ray of light reflected off the sunlight and dazzled the masked man's eyes, turning into a rainbow. It only took an instant. The sound of metal clashing and sparks flew everywhere. The flying sword spun and flew high into the sky. A black cloud shrouded the masked man's head. He raised his head in surprise and saw a pair of eyes filled with killing intent. Then he saw a blade, a long blade made of ice. In a daze, he seemed to see a huge black tiger pouncing towards him with an ice crystal blade in its mouth. Heaven and earth were filled with killing intent. All of this happened in the blink of an eye. Li Qingshan threw himself onto the snowy ground and quietly held the whale's ingestion of water in his hand. The ice blade formed, and the moment the flying sword was about to hit him, he swung the blade upwards and sent the flying sword flying. Without any hesitation, he threw himself forward and exerted strength in his limbs. He was like a tiger pouncing on its prey, pouncing towards the masked man. This kid hid his strength. The black-clothed masked man was worthy of being an 8th-layer Qi practitioner. In an instant he broke free from the restraints of the killing intent. As this thought flashed through his mind, he crossed his hands several times, then raised them up. Raising fire to burn the heavens, a black energy howled and spiraled out. The blade and the black energy collided fiercely, giving off an ear-piercing sound. It was like a chainsaw cutting through metal. Ice shards flew everywhere. Li Qingshan let out a wild roar and poured all of his gui water energy into the blade. He did not hold back at all. He gathered all of his essence, qi, and spirit into the blade and chopped down with all his might. It was like a volcano that had been suppressed for 1,000 years had finally erupted. An extremely comfortable feeling welled up in his heart. Regardless of the outcome of this strike, he already felt extremely carefree. The ice crystal blade was also extremely carefree. It broke through the black energy vortex. The masked man turned pale with fright. This was definitely not the strength a 4th-layer Qi practitioner should have. The blade cut through the protective energy, giving off a sharp, whistling sound. A stream of blood splattered onto the pure white snowy ground. Following that, a strong wind swept away the snow within a radius of several feet, revealing the black frozen ground below. On the frozen ground, there was a deep blade mark. Li Qingshan held the blade and stood upright. He gently touched the frozen blood on the blade and raised his head to look at the top of the forest. The masked man covered the wound on his chest and looked down. Their eyes met. It was like an invisible blade and sword clashing in the air, fiercely colliding countless times. Chapter 229. A startling sword. The black-clothed masked man formed a sword seal. His eyes were filled with cold fury, and he no longer dared to be careless. Although he had taken advantage of his carelessness, he definitely could not face an enemy who could injure him in one strike with the same attitude as a fourth-layer Qi practitioner. However, he was not worried. If he wanted to use a close-range weapon to fight against a flying sword, it would only be possible if he had an overwhelming advantage. Otherwise, he would definitely be slaughtered. Li Qingshan also knew this. He shook the whale's ingestion of water, and the ice saber suddenly turned into an ice shield. With a series of clanging sounds, the flying sword changed directions dozens of times and hit the ice shield dozens of times. Not only did it not break the ice shield, but it also froze over, and its speed became slightly slower. The flying sword shook once again, and its speed recovered. It continuously searched for Li Qingshan's weakness like a snake or a bird. However, the whale's ingestion of water was filled with ice condensate water, and the ice shield it formed was half a foot thick. It covered most of Li Qingshan's body. Although the flying sword was extremely agile, it could not break through it in a short period of time. A high-grade spirit weapon. The black-clothed masked man's eyes became even colder and brighter. According to that woman, even the beast core was sold by him. This was actually a blessing in disguise. Killing this person would definitely reap great rewards. He took out a scroll from his 100 treasures pouch and unfurled it. The strokes on the scroll were twisted, and there was sword qi. It was another cursive sword calligraphy. Li Qingshan's hair stood on end. A strong sense of danger surged in his heart, as if a great disaster was about to befall him. Dozens of sword qi cut through the raging wind, pierced through the drifting snow, and flew toward Li Qingshan. Vertical was the fastest, and in the blink of an eye, it was right in front of Li Qingshan's eyes, and pierced deeply into the ice shield. Horizontal was the slowest, but it was majestic and contained power. It seemed to be able to cut through all life, and it left a deep mark on the ice shield, causing ice shards to fly everywhere. Skimming and suppressing drew a deadly arc as they circled around Li Qingshan's back and went straight for his unprotected back at almost the same time. But the most subtle and fatal one was a hook. It suddenly hooked into the sky, then hooked into the earth. There was no way to predict its trajectory. It suddenly hooked into the black frozen earth. Li Qingshan felt a cold, murderous aura seeping out from the soles of his feet, trying to hook his life and soul. The flying sword did not stop at all. It kept searching for Li Qingshan's flaws. Li Qingshan let out a growl. The whale's ingestion of water spat out all of the ice condensate water, forming a ball of ice around him. It also formed the shape of the spirit turtle's profound shell. Piercing, smashing, slicing, and ripping. The ball of ice that was supposed to be tougher than steel was like a fragile soap bubble under the assault of the sword qi. It produced a series of cracking sounds, and cracks immediately covered the entire ball of ice. Li Qingshan was amazed. This was the first time he had witnessed the true power of the cursive sword calligraphy in the hands of someone else. The true qi of an 8th-layer qi practitioner granted the cursive sword calligraphy absolute destructive and lethal power. If Li Qingshan had not used ice condensate water but regular spring water or even spiritual water, he definitely would not have been able to block the attack. But at a closer glance, the cursive sword calligraphy in the masked man's hand paled in comparison to his own, both in terms of size and glow. It was only equivalent to a high-grade spiritual artifact. The masked man was slightly surprised. Who knew how many qi practitioners stronger than him he had killed with this sword calligraphy, yet it actually failed to breach the defenses of a puny qi practitioner today. The flying sword hovered in the air quietly. The masked man said, "Where did you get that high-grade spiritual artifact in your hand from? It can actually block my sword qi? No wonder you're so determined to obtain the sword qi calligraphy. So you really do have another fragment. It won't be so easy to kill me now." Li Qingshan shook the whale's ingestion of water, and the ball of ice once again transformed into an ice blade. There were no cracks on it, but it had consumed a lot of his true qi. He took out a spirit stone to recover his true qi. The masked man suddenly laughed loudly. Li Qingshan said, "What are you laughing at?" The masked man said, "The more good things you have, the happier I will be. Because these things will all belong to me in the end." Li Qingshan said, "Is that so? Then it looks like I have to laugh too." The masked man narrowed his eyes. "You've seen my moves just now. Do you still think you can escape death? Your arrogance is indeed not bad. Even I was almost fooled by you. But little tricks are useless in the face of absolute strength." He touched the terrible wound on his chest. Under the effect of his true qi, it had already begun to heal. It wouldn't be long before it would be as good as new. The reason why he had stopped to talk to Li Qingshan was largely because he wanted to use this opportunity to recover from his injuries. He wanted to use his junqi to expel the cold air from his body. His injuries were basically healed, so he didn't waste any more words. He pointed at Li Qingshan. "Go." The flying sword shot towards him. Li Qingshan also used the spirit stone to recover his true qi. He didn't transform into his demon form. He couldn't release his demon aura here. The surrounding desolate mountains could be hiding many qi practitioners preparing to participate in the herb gathering ceremony. There might be spying eyes on the distant peaks of the snowy mountains. They were here to kill demons. Once they felt the demonic aura, even Foundation establishment cultivators might be alerted. He couldn't take this risk. A normal 4th-layer qi practitioner obviously couldn't defeat an 8th-layer qi practitioner. But he wasn't just a normal 4th-layer qi practitioner. Moreover, he still had a trump card that he hadn't used yet. With a thud, the flying sword stabbed into the shield. Li Qingshan took out the low-grade spirit shield that he hadn't used for a long time and turned it into the size of a table in front of him. In his other hand, he used the whale's ingestion of water to suck in all the ice and water. He pointed it at the black-clothed masked man on the treetop. Whoosh 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 whoosh. Countless icicles shot out. The black-clothed masked man didn't care. He waved his sleeves, and a strange air current appeared dozens of feet in front of him. Although it wasn't very strong, with a light flick, all the icicles were deflected. Clang, clang, clang. The icicles shot into the dense forest. The treetop trembled and snow fell. There was a huge sound. It was as if a group of invisible elephants had charged into the forest. The towering trees toppled one after another. The icicles shot into the tree trunks and exploded with a cold air current that froze the tree trunks. The impact directly snapped many of the giant trees in half. It could be seen that the power of this move wasn't weak. If it was used to deal with a 6th-layer qi practitioner, it would be a terrifying killing move. However, it was far from enough to deal with an 8th-layer qi practitioner. Every time a meridian was opened, the true qi would multiply. This black-clothed masked man didn't just have powerful true qi, he also had exquisite techniques. The black-clothed masked man seemed to be a bit impatient. However, he only controlled the flying sword to attack. He wasn't willing to take a step closer to Li Qingshan. Instead, he was constantly on guard against him. He had a deep understanding of the terror of body refiners. He definitely wouldn't give him any chance to attack. He focused all his attention on the flying sword. The flying sword's speed became faster and faster. The sword's body was long gone. Only countless sword lights could be seen. They interweaved around Li Qingshan, forming a sword net. A series of ringing sounds rang out. Li Qingshan brandished the shield to defend himself. Every time the sword light streaked past, it would leave a deep cut on the shield. In the blink of an eye, the shield was covered in scars. The spiritual qi around it had dimmed to the extreme. It was already on the verge of collapse. Li Qingshan stood in place, unable to move. He knew very well that if he moved, he would reveal an opening, giving the flying sword an opportunity to attack. Moreover, even if he could get close and engage in close combat, he wouldn't be able to gain any advantage over an 8th-layer qi practitioner. But if he didn't move, wouldn't it be even more impossible for him to win? He was like a wild beast crawling in the grass, silently waiting for an opportunity to appear. It was fine if he didn't move, but once he did, he would definitely kill. However, the sword net pressed closer and closer. The longer he waited, the smaller the chance he had. He decided that if there wasn't an opportunity, he would create one himself. He suddenly raised the shield in his hand and knocked the flying sword back several meters. However, this move also left his chest wide open. A hint of ridicule appeared in the black-clothed masked man's eyes. The flying sword shot out at an even faster speed. With a whoosh, the cursive sword calligraphy unfurled and blocked in front of Li Qingshan's chest. Dozens of sharp sword chi rushed out. The flying sword collided with a vertical one and was immediately sent flying by a horizontal one. It was completely unable to block this wave of sword chi. The black-clothed masked man's heart trembled. He looked at the sword chi book that was even bigger than his own and revealed a look of shock. Then he really wanted to laugh out loud. I didn't think that the reason why this brat is willing to spend so much money to buy the sword chi book is because he has another fragment. If it was an ordinary 8th layer chi practitioner, their life would probably be in danger when faced with this sudden wave of sword chi. However, it was nothing to him. He shook the sword calligraphy in his hand again. His true chi was many times denser than Li Qingshan's, so he could use the sword calligraphy much more freely. He didn't have to worry about using it once and exhausting all his true chi. The two waves of sword chi collided in the air, but they didn't clash fiercely or cancel each other out. Instead, they directly fused into one, condensing into an ink-like black liquid that changed its shape in an instant. Both Li Qingshan and the black-clothed masked man revealed looks of ecstasy. This scene proved that the two styles of calligraphy were made by the same hand and that there was a possibility of them fusing together. However, this scene only lasted for an instant. The black liquid stretched to its limit, as if the pressure inside it had gone out of control. It exploded once again and turned into an indiscriminate wave of sword chi that spread out in all directions. Both of their expressions changed. They didn't dare to be the slightest bit careless. Before the sword chi had even been released, the momentum of the sword was already like an avalanche and a tsunami, covering the sky and earth. This kind of power had already surpassed a supreme-grade spiritual artifact. The black-clothed masked man shot into the sky like a black arrow. Li Qingshan didn't have time to dodge, so he knelt down on one knee and held the shield in his left hand and the whale's ingestion of water in his right hand. In front of him, they formed an extremely narrow and 7-foot-thick ice block. The sword wheel flashed, and all the ice and snow within a radius of 100 feet disappeared. The black-clothed masked man looked down from the sky and saw a black circle on the white ground. He couldn't help but swallow a mouthful of saliva. He was inexplicably excited. If he could control this kind of power, which chi practitioner would be able to oppose him? With a bang, only half of the round shield in Li Qingshan's hand remained. The spiritual chi on it had completely disappeared, and it was completely destroyed. As for the ice block in front of him, it was as easy as cutting a piece of paper. Li Qingshan was also shocked. If this sword chi hadn't scattered in all directions at will, but had been slightly controlled by someone, he would be a dead man now. Even if he transformed into a demon, he would still be severely injured. Even so, it was equivalent to him destroying an upper-grade spiritual artifact and a lower-grade spiritual artifact to barely block this sword chi. Fortunately, the whale's ingestion of water was made of water and could repair itself. Otherwise, it would have been a great loss. He raised his head and looked at the black-clothed masked man in the sky. His eyes were cold, and the bamboo basket behind him had already disappeared. The black-clothed masked man looked at the bamboo basket that was flying towards him. He was shocked and didn't know what kind of move this was, but he didn't dare to be careless. He separated his hands, and a black force soared into the sky, tearing the bamboo basket into pieces. A cold light flashed, like a meteor falling from the sky, tearing the force. Before the sword arrived, the sword chi seemed to have already passed through his body. The black-clothed masked man's eyes widened, and his body slightly stiffened. Not only was he shocked by the sword will, but he was also shocked and terrified. This sword will was clearly the same as the one in the sword writings. Could it be that there was really someone talented enough to understand the sword will? What was even more unbelievable was that the person holding the sword was actually a child who wasn't even 10 years old. Li Qingshan was shocked. When did this girl's swordsmanship reach such a level? Even from such a distance, he could feel the horror of the sword will. He couldn't help but think, If this sword was aimed at him, how would he deal with it? However, he couldn't come up with a suitable answer. Of course, he was originally a combat type. In a real life and death battle, he could only stimulate his full potential. And the huge crisis of life and death made the black-clothed masked man instantly come to his senses. He wanted to dodge, but found that it was impossible to do so. This didn't mean that it was impossible to borrow strength from the air. An 8th layer Qi practitioner could casually release a wave of true Qi and fly over 30 meters. Little and held the sword in her hand, the tip pointing straight at the black-clothed masked man. The tip of the sword was not straight, and it constantly trembled slightly. Li Qingshan felt that it was extremely familiar. He suddenly remembered that in the box of the sundry goods store, Little and had been lying on the ground, and her small hand had been constantly drawing in the air. It turned out that after obtaining the sword Qi writings, Little and had already completed a portion of the cursive sword writing sword will. And when Li Qingshan had been fighting with the black-clothed masked man, although she had been hiding in the bamboo basket, it hadn't affected her observation of the outside world at all. With a single glance, she could clearly see the strokes on the cursive sword writings in the black-clothed masked man's hands, and she could even feel the sword Qi it released up close. For ordinary people, this was just something that happened in the blink of an eye, and they wouldn't care at all. But for her, this brief glimpse was enough. In the world of geniuses, one only needed to comprehend. The 3 cursive sword writings overlapped in her mind, forming this sword. She had already obtained a trace of that ancient sword Immortal sword will. Like a comet striking the moon, in the time it took for a spark to fly off a flint, there was no time for the flying sword to save him, and there was no time for the talisman to be taken out. The black-clothed masked man frantically stretched out his hand, releasing all the true Qi in his body. A black energy swirled out like a tornado. Just like in the box, the tip of the sword suddenly stopped trembling, and all the strokes converged into a single point. Little and the black-clothed masked man brushed past each other, and both of them fell from the sky. Li Qingshan hurriedly rushed forward and caught Little An in his arms. She was sweating profusely, and the smell of sandalwood was growing stronger. Her eyes were dim, but they were still clear. She was just exhausted. The black-clothed masked man did a somersault and landed steadily on the ground. He pointed at Li Qingshan and then at Little An. Just as he said one word, an arrow of blood spurted out of his throat, and he flew to Li Qingshan. He trembled a few times and then collapsed. With a loud rumble, hundreds of giant trees slowly tilted and fell to the ground. The sound echoed through the valley like thunder. At the same time, the hidden blade in Little An's hand turned to dust and was blown away by the wind. The power of that one sword strike was not something a low-grade spiritual artifact could endure. At the same time, it had exhausted all of her energy. The effect was to instantly kill an 8th layer Qi practitioner. Little An stared at Li Qingshan and raised her chin. "I'll keep my word." Li Qingshan rubbed her nose. "All right then, I guess you're right." The flying sword fell from the sky like a dead snake. It was swept up by true energy and fell into Li Qingshan's hand. At the same time, he picked up the 100 treasures pouch and the remnant of the cursive sword calligraphy. Little An released a wisp of fire from her fingertip, and it drilled into the corpse, destroying all traces of it. Her body instantly recovered. Li Qingshan said, "Someone will be here soon. We can't stay here for long. Let's go." He had killed a powerful enemy without transforming and obtained the spirit artifact that he had yearned for even in his dreams. However, for some reason, that sense of danger did not dissipate. It was still hanging over his head like a dark cloud, so he chose to leave immediately. The two of them vanished into the messy valley. A while later, a group of Qi practitioners arrived. They stared at the surroundings in shock and looked at one another. Just now, were their Foundation establishment cultivators fighting here? Only the leading Qi practitioner frowned slightly. He was young, and his face was as smooth as jade. He was a 9th layer Qi practitioner. Although practicing Qi could slow down aging, it was clear that he was not old. He could be regarded as a genius no matter where he was at an age like that. He asked indifferently, "Song Ming, are you sure it's this direction?" He wore the same uniform of the Pheasant's Grace Mountain as Song Ming, except there were 3 multicolored plumes embroidered on his chest, one more than Song Ming. All the other Qi practitioners gathered around him. Not a single one of them was not a disciple of the Pheasant's Grace Mountain. Song Ming went up in a hurry and said politely, "Yes, first senior brother. Many people have personally witnessed it. It can't be wrong." The first senior brother said, "Then where is he right now?" His voice was still as calm as ever, but it originated from his absolute confidence in his strength. Song Ming hesitated. "He's definitely nearby." Before the first senior brother could say anything, another Qi practitioner beside him said, "Junior brother Song, the herb gathering ceremony is about to begin. How do we have the time to look for him with you? If you want us to avenge you, you better be a little smarter." Song Ming became furious, but he did not dare to lose his temper, as the person who spoke was also a core disciple of the Pheasant's Grace Mountain, and he was at the 7th layer. The first senior brother raised his hand, and all the voices quietened down. "Bullying Song Ming is bullying all the disciples of our Pheasant's Grace Mountain. As the first senior brother, I can't just stand up for you. I can't not get my revenge. P.S. For the sake of me not forgetting about my work when I'm entertaining, give me a few monthly tickets, brothers. When other people come back to rest, sleep, or watch TV, I'm working hard to write." Chapter 230. The Truth-Seeking Society. First senior brother is benevolent and righteous. No wonder he's been selected as the future sect master of the Pheasant's Grace Mountain. Our Pheasant's Grace Mountain will definitely become the leader of the 3 mountains. What leader of the 3 mountains? With first senior brother's talent, condensing a golden core and making the Pheasant's Grace Mountain a medium-sized sect will be a piece of cake. Song Ming also said in a hurry, "Thank you, first senior brother." However, he understood very well that if it were not for the several thousand spiritual stones worth of 100 treasures pouches, why would the arrogant first senior brother be so loyal? He would not even have time for cultivation. The snow began to fall again. The spring water gurgling under the frozen snow, which was why it was known as a quiet spring. Surrounded by the snowy mountains, there was a small valley with many exquisite thatched cottages. It looked like a paradise. A few Qi practitioners in loose clothes walked around the valley, chatting and drinking with each other in a carefree manner. It was a happy scene. All of a sudden, everyone turned around and saw a tall figure walking out of the forest. His steps were heavy and majestic, and he didn't have the slightest elegance of a Qi practitioner. Instead, he was like a ferocious beast that had walked out of the forest. This is the base of the Truth-Seeking Society. Li Qingshan said loudly, "I've come to find Han Xiong." His voice boomed through the entire valley. Han Xiong emerged from a hut. As soon as he saw Li Qingshan, he beamed with joy. "Fellow Niu, you've finally come." Li Qingshan nodded. "I've come to take a look." Han Xiong introduced him to the Qi practitioners in a hurry. When everyone heard that he was the renowned Niu Juxia, they all praised him. They looked at one another and smiled. Afterwards, they led Li Qingshan into the largest hut. The hut had a wooden floor. Everyone sat on the ground with a charcoal fire at the center. Food and alcohol were currently being cooked. The fragrance filled the entire room. Even Li Qingshan's nerves eased up slightly when he found a place like this in the snowy weather. Han Xiong said, "Please wait a moment, fellow Daoist. I will invite our president over." A while later, even more Qi practitioners surged in. There were around 20 of them now. The Qi practitioners conversed with Li Qingshan all at once. They were all very enthusiastic. 2 female cultivators even served him a bowl of hot alcohol and a bowl of meat soup. Li Qingshan sniffed and praised, "Good wine." He drank the wine and ate the meat, but did not say anything else. Seeing that he didn't want to talk much, the Qi practitioners didn't force him either. They started chatting among themselves, mostly about the herb gathering ceremony. As it turned out, they were planning to form a small team and enter the underground together. However, their eyes never left Li Qingshan. Li Qingshan, however, seemed to be unaware of anything. He sat like a stone statue in front of the stove, allowing the flickering flames to reflect his figure on the wall. After a while, Han Xiong returned with an old man. The old man was as skinny as a monkey, wearing a loose Daoist robe that looked like it was stolen. Han Xiong had to bend over to speak into his ear. However, the group of wandering cultivators seemed to be very respectful towards him. When they saw him, they all called out, "President!" Li Qingshan looked back as well. A 7th-layer Qi practitioner. Among this group of independent cultivators, he could be regarded as a rare expert. Apart from the old man, there were 2 6th-layer Qi practitioners as well. The 3 of them seemed to be the leaders of the group. Han Xiong hurriedly said, "Fellow Daoist Niu, this is the president of our truth-seeking society, Priest Qiu." Seeing that Li Qingshan had no intention of coming over to greet him, Han Xiong's expression became slightly awkward. Gulp gulp. Li Qingshan lowered his head and drank his wine. No one knew what he was thinking. Priest Qiu turned his hand and closed the door. The howling wind and snow outside the hut instantly quieted down. The hut became a closed world. Then he chuckled and said, "This must be fellow Daoist Niu. This humble Daoist greets you." He was not angry at Li Qingshan's rudeness at all. Li Qingshan nodded slightly. "Hello, Priest Qiu." Priest Qiu said, "It's our honor to have fellow Daoist visit our truth-seeking society. Today, our truth-seeking society is also full of virtuous people. I don't think we'll disappoint fellow Daoist." Li Qingshan said, "I'm just taking a look." Priest Qiu also sat down by the stove. "Hee, it's fine to take a look. I'll tell you about the truth-seeking society's purpose, the so-called seeking truth." He spoke eloquently and gave an impassioned speech. He talked about how they were all brothers and sisters, how evil the sects were and how they wanted to bully their brothers and sisters, and how they should unite and so on. When this wretched-looking old man started speaking, he seemed to be shrouded in a halo. He was extraordinarily charming, and his words were filled with provocation. The wandering cultivators all raised their heads and listened excitedly. Li Qingshan was a person with a heart of steel. He would not be moved so easily. He just felt that this scene was a little familiar. Priest Qiu suddenly stopped speaking and said to Li Qingshan, "Fellow Daoist Niu, don't you think this makes sense?" Instantly, more than 20 pairs of eyes stared at Li Qingshan's face. Li Qingshan said, "Is this the reason?" Everyone looked delighted. Priest Qiu continued, "I've cultivated for 100 years and observed the path of cultivation. The biggest problem is that people are selfish. They cherish their techniques and only impart them to their disciples. As a result, many talented people are unknown in the wilderness, and many good techniques are lost." The wandering cultivators nodded. They were such talented people, but they all became wandering cultivators because they did not receive the inheritance. If we can break the prejudice of the sects and families and exchange our techniques and knowledge throughout the cultivation world, so that every senior can be the teacher of the younger generation, how can the cultivation world not prosper? There will also be less fighting and killing. In less than 100 years, the number and quality of cultivators will increase by 100 times. How hard will it be to kill all the demons in the world? This grand blueprint made all the itinerant cultivators very excited. Li Qingshan was also slightly surprised. He had thought that this was just an alliance of the wandering cultivators. He did not expect them to have such a grand goal. Moreover, it was a dream. If they could realize it, they would not be far from the great harmony of the world. Priest Qiu said solemnly, "Of course it will not be easy, but as long as we work hard, there will be hope. The truth-seeking society is the hope of the world's cultivation." Then, it was time for the wandering cultivators to communicate. A man stood up and said, "I was originally at the 2nd stage of Qi training. Ever since I joined the truth-seeking society and communicated with fellow Taoists, I have benefited a lot. I recently broke through and reached the 3rd stage of Qi training." There was a round of cheers. The other cultivators also stood up and spoke. After each person finished speaking, there was a round of cheers. The house was immersed in the enthusiastic atmosphere. Finally, it was Li Qingshan's turn. Li Qingshan shook his head, indicating that he had nothing to say. The wandering cultivators did not let it go. They urged him in unison, "Speak, speak, speak, speak." Li Qingshan frowned slightly. Priest Qiu raised his hand and the urging stopped immediately. "Since fellow Daoist Niu is unwilling to speak, I will say a few words. Whether it is for the development of the cultivation community as a whole or for an individual to improve, the most important thing is to break this selfishness." Priest Qiu extended a fist towards Li Qingshan and then loosened it. "Open your fist and you will be able to hold more things. If you can show kindness to others, they will reciprocate. The most basic saying is, you can only gain if you give up." Priest Qiu clapped his hands. "Now it is time to share. Everyone take out your things. Fellow Niu, if you need anything, just say the word." The wandering cultivators followed the previous order and took out the things in their 100 treasures pouches to share. It was either spirit herbs or spirit pellets. When it was a female wandering cultivator's turn, she suddenly took off her clothes and revealed her firm chest. She wanted to share her body. If anyone needed it, they could go to her room to find her. This made Li Qingshan dumbfounded. The female cultivator saw Li Qingshan's expression and said proudly, "We are all brothers and sisters. In this lonely world, we should comfort each other. My body can satisfy everyone and I can also obtain happiness. Why not?" After winning the praise of the crowd, she puffed her chest even higher. It was as if there was a more noble spirit that replaced the vulgar concept of chastity. It made her whole person sublimate like a saint. Li Qingshan grinned and did not say anything. He only felt that the things he saw today were really strange. The entire sharing process was carried out in an extremely harmonious atmosphere. There were no arguments, no quarrels, and the atmosphere was harmonious. Sometimes, when 2 or 3 Qi practitioners valued the same thing, they would immediately give it to each other. Even blood brothers would not be so friendly. In both of Li Qingshan's lives, he had never seen so many friendly, humble, and kind people. Everyone's faces were brimming with happiness. In this lonely cultivation world, it was simply too good to be able to be so kind and warm to each other. Finally, it was Li Qingshan's turn. Li Qingshan, who had been silent since the beginning, said again, "I have nothing to share." As if a bucket of cold water had been poured on this warmth and happiness, everyone's expression changed. More than 20 pairs of eyes stared coldly at him. Priest Qiu said, "Don't forget what I said. You can only gain by giving up. Only when you give your heart to someone else will they give their heart to you." Han Xiong said, "Fellow Niu, didn't you buy the Gui water condensing Qi method and the Book of All? There is no loss in sharing them, right?" The eyes of all the itinerant cultivators lit up. The Gui water condensing Qi method was a holy item for itinerant cultivators who cultivated Gui water true Qi, and the Book of All could be said to be commonly needed by all itinerant cultivators. However, these 2 books were too expensive. Generally, no itinerant cultivator could afford them. Li Qingshan shook his head firmly. "I don't want to share them." He had spent 200 spirit stones to buy these 2 books. There was no reason to give them to others for free. If all the books in the world could be shared like this, then Sun Fubai's shop would have long been closed. He did not mind exchanging them, but the things that the itinerant cultivators took out were not very valuable. None of them caught his eye. At most, they were worth a few spirit stones. This was probably not because they were deliberately hiding things, but because they were poor to begin with. Chapter 231. It was understandable that the weak wanted to team up, but the strong would never want to be on equal footing with the weak. At least, Li Qingshan did not want to be on equal footing with the weak. His lonely and arrogant heart did not need too much warmth from strangers. Little and alone was enough for his family. The expressions of the wandering cultivators all changed. Just now, the female cultivator who wanted to share her body cursed in a low voice, "Selfish." All the wandering cultivators followed suit, "Selfish, selfish, selfish." The sound waves surged like the tide, surrounding Li Qingshan. In the rising flames, the shadows on the wall twisted like evil spirits about to pounce on people. Li Qingshan picked up the iron rod and poked at the fire. He asked, "Did you add something to the fire?" Priest Qiu was slightly shocked. I don't know what you're talking about. Li Qingshan said, your voice is also very unique. It reminds me of some old things. The buildings in Jiaping City, the singing, the dancing, and the incense. After that experience, if he fell for it a second time, he would be an idiot. Priest Chiu lowered his head. Join our truth-seeking society, and I can make you vice president. The two sixth-layer Qi practitioners wanted to say something, but Priest Chiu stopped them with a look. Oh. Li Qingshan smiled. I can join, but I want to ask, during the herb-gathering ceremony of the 3 mountains, will you also go underground? Priest Chiu smiled. I'm already too old. St. Hall. Han Xiong said, the president is our father, the hope of the cultivation world. How can he go to such a dangerous place? We will find the spirit herbs and bring them back to share. He was originally a smart and capable person, but at this moment, there was a kind of fanaticism in his eyes. What he said was met with agreement. Li Qingshan's heart was like a mirror. The strongest did not go underground, but waited for the weak to take the risk to gather the herbs and bring them back to the strong. How was this a relationship between father and son? It was clearly a relationship between master and slave. Priest Chiu used the truth-seeking society to enslave all the rogue cultivators here. What was even more terrifying was that these rogue cultivators were willing to do it. They were like fanatical believers who had been completely brainwashed. This was not something that could be done in a short period of time. Under the gaze of the Qi practitioners, Li Qingshan shook his head and said, you and I are not on the same path. Priest Chiu said sinisterly, selfish people don't have the right to live in this world. The killing intent condensed to the point that it was almost tangible. The flame dimmed bit by bit and was finally extinguished. Among the 20-odd Qi practitioners, there were strong ones and weak ones. However, it really was just as they said, they were siblings. Their true energies tangled about, all of it gathering on their father Daoist Chiu's body. Daoist Chiu's true energy continued to climb, easily breaking through the 8th level to the 9th, then the 10th. The terrifying true energy surpassed Li Qingshan's understanding of Qi practitioners, and it came crashing down on him like a tsunami. Holy Church, this seemed to be some kind of mystical joint attack technique. No wonder they dared to oppress Li Qingshan even though they knew that he could defeat a 6th-level Qi practitioner in one move. Li Qingshan felt like he was a straw hut by the seaside that was about to be crushed by the tsunami. He rubbed his forehead. Was this how it felt? Priest Chiu said, look at how strong I am. If you continue to be stubborn and refuse to let go of your selfishness, only death awaits you. Open your heart and join us. Become one with the big family, and you will receive the big family's protection. As he said this, the 20-odd rogue cultivators also spoke in unison. Their thunderous voices rolled in the small hut, as if they wanted to crush all dissidents. The walls of the hut were flashing with runes and some kind of formation. It was like an iron fortress. Li Qingshan felt like he was trapped in a cage with a monster. Li Qingshan propped himself up and knelt on one knee. He held the whale's ingestion of water in his hand and shook his head. Is that all? Priest Chiu roared. The Qi practitioners pounced forward as if they had gone mad. Spells, spirit talismans, spirit tools, and all kinds of colorful lights rushed toward Li Qingshan. Boom, 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 boom. Sparks and lightning shot everywhere. The violent air currents blew the extinguished ashes high into the air. By the time the dust had dispersed, an ice ball had formed where Li Qingshan was. Li Qingshan curled up, hiding in the ball. He was completely unscathed. Priest Chiu raised his hand, and the surging true qi condensed into a huge hand that grabbed the ice crystal ball. The ice crystal ball was covered in cracks. Even the profound ice formed by the ice condensate water could not withstand the terrifying power of over 20 qi practitioners. The ice crystal ball shattered, and the true qi hand grabbed Li Qingshan and pressed him to the ground. Li Qingshan spat out a mouthful of blood and asked, "You didn't plan to let me go from the beginning, did you? Originally, I wanted to control you so that I could use your power while taking your things. I never thought you'd actually be so insensible. Do you have anything else you want to say now?" Priest Chiu walked over and looked at the immobilized Li Qingshan. He was complacent like a victor. Li Qingshan said indifferently, "Is that all you've got?" Priest Xiao said angrily, "Die." In the snow forest beside the valley, Little and squatted unhappily and used a branch to draw on the snow. Because she did not have a bamboo basket, Li Qingshan told her to wait here. However, ever since Li Qingshan entered the small house, all sounds and auras had been cut off. This made her feel slightly uneasy. Suddenly, this feeling of uneasiness grew stronger for no reason at all. Little and suddenly stood up and stared at the small house in the distance. After a moment of hesitation, she was about to walk towards the small house. However, she suddenly seemed to sense something and shrank back. She sharply observed her surroundings, and 2 prayer beads fell from her wide sleeves. They rolled and turned into 2 tiny skulls. One flew into the sky, and the other flew close to the ground. Fiery light flickered in her eyes, and her vision instantly became extremely wide. She could see the entire valley, and she could see every blade of grass and tree on the ground in great detail. Great beauty and white bones, seeing through illusions. She immediately saw a dozen or so qi practitioners stealthily approaching from all directions. They had all used high-grade concealment arts, and their figures were almost transparent. In this world of white snow, even those with extremely good eyesight would find it difficult to find their traces. However, Little and could see them extremely clearly with her divine abilities. She couldn't help but panic, but she did not know how to inform Li Qingshan. The smug expression on Priest Xiao's face froze. He stared in disbelief at the horrifying wound on his chest. Li Qingshan was still lying there, staring coldly at him. Beside Li Qingshan's hand was an unfurled cursive sword calligraphy. The instant Daoist Xiao made his move, the crisscrossing sword qi cut through his protective Xinqi like a knife cutting through butter. Priest Xiao said in disbelief, This is a supreme-grade spirit artifact? How could a little qi practitioner have such a treasure? Chapter 232. Daoist Xiao crashed to the ground, fresh blood flowing from his body. His eyes were wide open, and he died with everlasting regret. The surrounding wandering cultivators were all dumbfounded. Li Qingshan shook his head. This was indeed a terrifying technique, but locking himself up in this small room was their greatest mistake. If he had used this bit of true qi to cast spells from afar, even Li Qingshan would find it very troublesome. But at such a close distance, there was no way he could dodge the terrifying sword qi released by the cursive sword calligraphy. He didn't even have the chance to cast spells. And Daoist Xiao was still a 7th-layer qi practitioner, not a 10th-layer qi practitioner. His reaction speed was still slightly inferior to that of the black-clothed masked man just now. And how could his unrefined protective true qi block the sword qi? President Han Xiong roared and pounced at Li Qingshan. The ice blade stabbed into Han Xiong's body, and the blade came out through his back. Han Xiong's eyes were bloodshot, and he continued to madly charge forward, wanting to grab Li Qingshan's shoulder. But under Li Qingshan's cold gaze, his body quickly froze into an ice sculpture. His face was pale, and he looked as sinister as a ghost. Li Qingshan twisted the blade's hilt, and the ice sculpture shattered, splattering all over the ground. Han Xiong's dismembered corpse covered the entire small room. The ice blade suddenly disappeared and reappeared behind Li Qingshan. It cut off the head of a wandering cultivator who was holding a long sword and about to stab Li Qingshan. At this moment, a sharp whistle tore through the air. Following Daoist Xiao's death, all the wandering cultivators fell into a frenzy of rage. They no longer feared death. Li Qingshan was their father's murderer. Dozens of hands reached out, and dozens of eyes glared angrily. The small room seemed to spin, and Li Qingshan stood in the center, feeling slightly dizzy. Was this what it felt like? Before he could even think, the ice blade danced in a blue and white blur. 7 hands were sent flying and 4 legs were severed. A young man was sliced in half. Just now, the rogue cultivator who wanted to share his body was sliced in half at the waist. Fortunately, they did not feel any pain. The cold penetrated deep into their bodies and froze all of their corpses. They fell to the ground and shattered. It sounded like someone had thrown a bunch of glassware on the ground. From life to death, it only took an instant. The moment he landed, he turned into ice dust. A flying sword pierced through the net of blades and went straight for Li Qingshan's temple. Without turning his head, Li Qingshan raised his hand and pinched the flying sword. The flying sword trembled like a small snake, but it could not break free. Li Qingshan tilted his head and met the eyes of the 6th-layer Qi practitioner. With a casual toss of his hand, the flying sword shot out uncontrollably and embedded itself deeply into the wooden door, the tail of the sword trembling incessantly. The other 6th-layer Qi practitioner sprawled on the ground in panic. Just now, he wanted to activate the formation and escape. If not for his quick reaction, he would have been pierced through the head. The two of them were the core members of the Truth-Seeking Society. Perhaps it was because they were strong enough that they were not as controlled. They were not as crazy as normal rogue cultivators. As soon as Priest Chiu died, they rushed forward without a care. One wanted to sneak and attack, the other wanted to escape. Li Qingshan's left hand also held the hilt of his blade. Now he held it with both hands, the tip of the blade pointing behind him as he crouched down slightly. Li Qingshan's figure disappeared. The cold wind swept up the ice dust like an angry ice dragon, charging towards the 6th-layer Qi practitioner who wanted to sneak and attack. All the rogue cultivators who blocked the path of the ice dragon were crushed and turned into a part of the ice dust. The 6th-layer Qi practitioner was shocked. He reacted quickly and took out a high-grade scarlet fire talisman to activate it. He shouted, "Die!" The 6th-layer Qi practitioner at the door shouted, "No!" The scarlet fire talisman had already spat out flames that resembled the breath of a fire dragon. The ice dragon and fire dragon collided. Boom! A loud explosion shook the entire valley. Sacred Hall, the roof of the secluded hut in the valley, was lifted several feet high by the shockwave and shattered into pieces in the air. A puff of white smoke rose from the hut. Because of the array, the hut still maintained its original structure, but it was charred black everywhere. The dozen or so figures who had quietly gathered around hurriedly crouched down and looked at the little house not far away in shock, not knowing what had happened. Little and let out a sigh of relief. He had already sensed Li Qingshan's aura. The whale's ingestion of water blade in Li Qingshan's hand had turned into a strange shape. The edge of the blade extended in all directions, forming a huge ball of ice that covered Li Qingshan. Although it was very thin, it was enough to block the explosion of the scarlet fire talisman. The long and narrow edge of the blade had already pinned the 6th-layer Qi practitioner to the charred wall. This whale's ingestion of water blade was extremely useful to him. With his ability to react in battle, he was able to make full use of the blade's transformations. However, because he was only at the 4th layer of Qi refining, he still couldn't completely control this high-grade spiritual weapon. If it weren't for the fact that he cultivated Gui water true Qi and that his true Qi was extremely pure, he wouldn't have been able to display such power. Li Qingshan pulled out the blade, and the Qi practitioner slid down from the wall and landed on the ground with a bang. Li Qingshan turned around. The only living person left in the room was the 6th-layer Qi practitioner at the door, but he was also heavily injured. The wooden door he had wanted to open had already been blown open, and the formation had completely dissipated. He crawled out with difficulty. The other wandering cultivators had all been turned into charred corpses in the explosion. It was just like how using a lightning summoning talisman in a thunderstorm would have an extremely strong effect. The small hut sealed off with formations completely restricted the power of the scarlet fire talisman to the cramped space, constantly condensing and compressing it. Even 6th-layer Qi practitioners would be heavily injured if they did not possess a defensive spiritual artifact. Li Qingshan walked over slowly with his blade in hand. The Qi practitioner looked back in fear, doing everything he could to mobilize the remaining true Qi in his body. Don't kill me. I was forced to do this." However, Li Qingshan did not hesitate at all. He was expressionless, but there was a hint of confusion in his eyes, as if he was thinking about something he did not understand. He arrived before the Qi practitioner and raised his blade. "Stop. The Hawkwolf Guard will handle this." Over a dozen people leapt out from the snowy ground and drew their blades with a series of swishes. The wind-entwining blades shone brightly under the sunlight as they pointed them directly at Li Qingshan. 9 wolf-fang flying blades hovered in the air, ready to strike. The invisibility technique had lost its effect, revealing their black uniforms of the Hawkwolf Guard. Every single one of them was a commander. The man in the lead was dressed in scarlet clothes, but he was a scarlet wolf. He did not carry a blade. Instead, thin chains wrapped around him, flickering with light. Arg! With a short, miserable shriek, Li Qingshan raised his blade and swung it down. The Qi practitioner's head rolled down the stairs of the hut. How dare you! The man in scarlet clothes became furious. The chains in his hands immediately thickened and lengthened, reaching straight out with a clatter. The tip of the chains turned into a snake's head, biting towards Li Qingshan. Li Qingshan tilted his head slightly and dodged the snake's head, but the chains suddenly twisted in the air. They circled around a few times before tightening suddenly, wrapping around Li Qingshan. The snake's head bit firmly into Li Qingshan's shoulder. Li Qingshan's gray water true qi immediately seemed to freeze, unable to circulate at all. The man in scarlet clothes rejoiced inside, and a sneer appeared on his lips. His python constrictor chain was a high-grade spiritual artifact he had obtained after carrying out who knew how many missions and how much contribution he had obtained. It could twist and turn at will, making it much more useful than regular flying swords. Once it entangled an enemy, it could seal off their true qi. Qi practitioners without true qi would obviously be unable to put up any resistance. Who knew how many criminals he had captured with this spiritual artifact? The other Hawkwolf commanders all relaxed. Only a beautiful woman among them furrowed her brows slightly. She wore the uniform of a Black Wolf commander, and she was only at the 5th layer. She could basically be regarded as one of the weakest among these people. However, she glanced at the tall, sturdy man before looking at the ruins behind him. Her face was filled with doubt. According to the tip-off, the remnant of the White Lotus sect, Qiu Ruelio, should be there. There should be several dozen independent cultivators around him as well. Qiu Ruelio was only at the 7th layer, yet he was able to make the Scarlet Wolf Guard in the prefectural city send a Scarlet Wolf and mobilize all the commanders in the nearby Hawkwolf Guard to assist him. Although the White Lotus sect was the mortal enemy of all the Hawkwolf Guards in the Rui Commandery, Qiu Ruelio was not easy to deal with since the higher-ups had mobilized so much. Now, all of these people seemed to be dead. They had died to this man's hands. However, he clearly noticed that even when the chains wrapped around the man, he did not panic at all. Get over here. The man in scarlet clothes tugged on the python constrictor chain. The chain became taut, but he was immediately stunned. Li Qingshan did not budge at all. Get over here. Li Qingshan grabbed the chain and tugged hard. The man in scarlet clothes felt an irresistible force pass through the chain. Caught off guard, he was pulled into the air. He was filled with disbelief. All of the power of Qi practitioners originated from the true Qi in their bodies. How could he still possess such terrifying power when his true Qi was locked up? Li Qingshan thought, I've never lost to anyone in terms of strength. Though, why are there Hawkwolf Guards here? Have they discovered my identity and want to take me back? His gaze swept past the dozen or so Hawkwolf Guards before suddenly stopping on the beautiful woman. He thought Qianrongji. He had never expected her to come as well, but she did not seem to recognize him. That meant they had not come to capture him, so he eased up slightly. Apart from Qianrongji, the other commanders were all stunned. Wu Zhen was only a Scarlet Wolf Guard and not a commander, but he was still half a level higher than them, who were all Black Iron commanders. He was much stronger too, having reached the 8th layer. The high-grade spiritual artifact in his hand, the Python Constrictor Chain, made them envious too. They never thought they would fail to restrain this unknown independent cultivator in a single stroke. Now, they went to his aid in a hurry. Flying blades shot over. Even if they could not control flying blades, they still rushed over with them. Qianrongji said, "Be careful. This person is born with tremendous strength. He might even be a body practitioner." Welcome to Immortal Cultivation Audiobooks. your gateway to the mystical world of Xianxia. Dive into legendary tales of martial arts, spiritual growth, and immortal ascension. Here, we bring you full-length English audiobooks of the best Wuxia and Xianxia stories, from young prodigies to ancient sect wars. Perfect for fans of Against the Gods, Martial World, and tales of demons and gods.